So, I released a video essay on this channel about the Druze, but very few people watched it. It's my fault, to be honest. I should have known that an hour and a half was a bit too long for such a subject. So I figured I'd make this shorter video to cover some of the main things that I talk about in that longer one, especially stuff that you won't see covered in any other video on the Druze, specifically their political history. And so maybe you'll find this video to be enough. But if you want more information about the Druze in general, and you want to hear my personal insights as a Druze person myself, then the link to the full video will be in the description below. So first, hello, I'm politically depressed. And despite this accent, I am actually a Lebanese Druze. Technically the singular is Druze, but I'm not going to do that because it feels very weird mixed in with English. There's been a lot of discussions about the Druze lately, and I think it reveals, more than anything, just how little knowledge exists about us. And the thing is, there are already a few videos on YouTube about the Druze, some that are pretty extensive. But I personally find these videos really lacking, for the main reason that they only focus on the faith. But the truth is, most Druze don't actually know that much about their faith or its history. They know that we believe in monotheism and reincarnation, but aside from that, the rest of the religious knowledge is kind of left to the clergy. Instead, what motivates Druze people has much more to do with political, social, and economic factors than anything to do with religion. Why, for instance, some Druze in Palestine have embraced the occupation and fight in its army is not explainable through religious terms, although some Zionists do try to do that. Likewise, it's not for religious reasons that many Druze refuse service in the IDF and work to prevent other members from their community from doing so. In the same light, the current conflict in Syria between the Druze communities and the new central authorities has very little to do with religion. Basically, what I'm saying is if you want to understand the Druze, you have to view them through a historical, political, and I guess geopolitical lens. So in this shorter video, I want to focus on the aspects of the Druze that all those other videos neglect, despite the fact that I think it provides much more insight into who the Druze are, how they see themselves, and how they exist in the wider Levant region. I'll share with you key figures and phases of Druze political history, but I'm gonna stop short of talking about very contemporary things. Again, for that, you have to go watch the longer video. So the Druze have existed for 1,000 years, 982 to be exact, and have played a pretty significant role in the Levant since they came about. Examining this history negates a lot of false perceptions about the Druze as a weak, vulnerable minority that stands with the respective powers of the day. In fact, their political history demonstrates, for the most part, quite the opposite. A minority identity that played an oversized role, both regionally and nationally, who have been at the forefront of national and anti-imperialist struggles. Yes, of course, there is one main exception, and I'll talk about that later. The Druze emerged as a distinct religious community in the 11th century AD, and very quickly became important players in the politics of the Levant region. In the 12th century, leaders in Damascus solicited the support of Druze emirs in Mount Lebanon to fight against the crusading Franks, and in return were granted land and relative autonomy. The same process occurred in the following century, except this time against the Mongolian Empire, which were finally pushed back by the Mamluks with the support of local communities such as the Druze. In the 16th century, during the beginning of the Ottoman rule of the Levant, a Druze emir by the name of Fakhreddin emerged in Mount Lebanon. Yes, this is the only image that exists of him. I know he looks like a Furby. There's not much we can do about it. Fakhreddin coalesced a bunch of feudal fiefdoms under his control, and essentially how historians read it was that he created a proto-Lebanese state. Obviously, it's not a state in the way we understand it today, but it was essentially an expanded dominion that gave him and other Druze feudal lords semi-autonomy within the Ottoman Empire against the peasantry. The majority of the politics of Mount Lebanon, up until the fall of the Ottoman Empire, was characterized by a Druze-Maronite duality. For those that don't know, Maronites are a denomination of Christianity within Lebanon. This power sharing eventually led to a civil war in 1860 between the Druze and the Christians. And although there were massacres on both sides, it is notable that the Druze committed the vast majority of these massacres and expulsions of Christians from Mount Lebanon. Another major figure to emerge from Mount Lebanon was a man named Kamal Jumblat. Kamal Jumblat came from a very notable family and entered politics quite early in the 40s and 50s, and became known as one of the leading progressive politicians in Lebanon. In the 1960s, Kamal Jumblat founded what would be known as the Lebanese National Movement, a coalition of Lebanese leftists, socialists, Arab nationalists, which were aligned with the Palestinian Fedayeen and the PLO. The Lebanese National Movement wanted to overthrow the sectarian oligarchical system in Lebanon and essentially saw the struggle for Palestinian liberation from Zionism as intertwined with the Arab struggle against imperialism and capitalism. Kamal Jumblat was one of the key figures in the lead-up and in the very early years of the Lebanese Civil War. Kamal Jumblat was assassinated in 1977 by Hafez al-Assad during the Syrian regime's invasion of Lebanon, which was done to support the Christian far-right Phalange and to attack and dismantle both the Lebanese National Movement and the PLO. After his assassination, his son Walid Jumblat takes over. And as I say in the main video, and I go into much more detail, if we can describe Kamal Jumblat as a man of integrity, his son Walid is anything but. Not only does Walid Jumblat shift allegiances several times throughout the war, he also turns the PSP, which is the Progressive Socialist Party, the party his father founded, into a fully sectarian party for the Druze, with him on top, and essentially became one of the most notorious warlords of the Civil War era. And even though he officially stepped away from politics, Walid Jumblat is still one of the most influential politicians in Lebanon. Another major Druze figure in the region is a man named Sultan Basha al-Atrash. He is in fact known as one of the most important figures in Syrian national history. In 1918, as the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, Sultan Basha al-Atrash was part of the forces that liberated Damascus as part of the Arab Revolt. During the French Mandate, he led what would be known as the Great Syrian Revolt of 1925, which rose up against the French Mandate and its attempts to carve up the country and its refusal to grant the Arabs the independence which they had promised only a few years earlier. Following the crushing of this revolt, Sultan Pasha al-Atrash went into exile, but returned in 1945 to lead the revolt against the French rule in the context of the Second World War. During the early days of independence, al-Atrash, alongside the region of Suwaida that he came from, was sidelined by the new central authorities. This eventually led to a direct assault by the central authority on Suwaida, specifically under the premiership of a man named Adib Shishakli. He not only bombarded the region, but also sent an estimated 10,000 regular troops to occupy the region known as Jabal al-Druze within the Suwaida province. Interestingly enough, Shishakli was assassinated 13 years later while living in exile in Brazil by a Druze man whose parents were killed by Shishakli's bombardment of Suwaida. The Druze under the Assad regime were granted relative autonomy and were described as being late to joining the Syrian revolution, which started in 2011. And although Bashar al-Assad never directly attacked the Suwaida region, the dynamics between them that emerged in this period were one in which the Druze actively prevented members of their community from being conscripted into the army, and the sort of frustration by the Assad regime about this essentially intransigence and this belligerence. It is from these attempts at preventing people from being conscripted into the army, as well as defending the Sueda region from these newly formed Sunni extremist groups, that you have these new Druze militants and militias forming. And so, in December 2024, when Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and other groups were on a lightning campaign from the north of the country, local militias in Sueda formed a coalition with other militias in the south, liberated their areas, and headed towards Damascus. A lot can be said about the current situation between the Druze of Sueda and the new Shara administration. Again, if you want to hear my thoughts on that, go to the longer video in the description below. I do actually talk quite a bit about it, particularly as it relates to the kind of history of the struggle between the Sueda province and the central government in Damascus, but also including Israel and the Zionist attempts at kind of currying favor with the Druze, which brings us neatly to the next point. The Druze of Palestine are historically much smaller, and never really had any figures like Fakhr ad-Din or Sultan Pasha al-Atrash emerge from their ranks. For the most part, they remained neutral, stayed out of politics, and focused on their own survival. This is true both for their lack of involvement in the 1936 uprising and in their lack of resistance in the 1948 Nakba. Any resistance that did emerge from the Druze communities within Palestine in 1948 came from support specifically by Sultan Pasha al-Atrash from Sueda. But it is true that even in 1948, some Druze did fight alongside the Haganah, which were the Zionist forces that later became the IDF. But for the most part, most remained neutral, worried about being expelled themselves from the land by the Zionists. And ever since then, and especially starting in the 1950s, the Israelis have attempted to create a distinct identity for the Druze that would separate them from their Palestinianness and their Arabness. In 1956, the Israelis began implementing forced conscription of Druze men over 18 into the Israeli army. This was initially met with resistance, even by the Druze leaders who, up until then, had cooperated with the Israelis, but eventually those voices were co-opted and brought into the fold. And despite their constant efforts to win over the Druze and create this idea of Druze Israelis, most Druze within historic Palestine still identify as Arabs. And although the focus of the discourse is almost always on the Druze that do serve in the Israeli army, there are many others who refuse, who face the consequences, and who actually organize within their communities to support those and incentivize those to not join. And with that said, the Druze are also not the only minorities within so-called Israel that join and fight in the army. There are also members of Bedouin communities that fight within the IDF. This is in no way an attempt to absolve anyone who joins this genocidal army, but rather to de-exceptionalize it. Because I notice a lot of people focus only on the Druze, but not other Arabs, other Muslims that are part of this, again, genocidal army. And so lastly, the Golan Heights is another place where there's a large Druze population that is very much in focus today, especially in relation to Israeli occupation and to the new Syrian administration. The Golan Heights is Syrian territory that is illegally occupied by the State of Israel, which captured the territory by war in 1967. In 1981, the Israelis formally annexed the territory. What this means is that these occupied Syrian Druze were given the opportunity to become citizens of the State of Israel. However, this was met with fierce rejection. In February of 1982, the Druze of the Golan Heights began what is known as the Identity Intifada. What this meant in practical terms is the rejection of the Israeli identity cards and citizenship, and was manifest through a historic 6-month general strike launched by the Druze of the Golan. And to that effect, by 2010, only 10% of the residents of the Golan Heights accepted Israeli citizenship, accepted Israeli residency. That is to say, the vast, vast majority, for decades, resisted and refused Israeli assimilation. And so even till this day, most people, most residents of the Golan Heights still identify as Syrians, still see themselves as Syrian Druze who are occupied by the Israeli state. Ultimately, what I think the Druze of the Golan make clear is how Israel tries constantly to weaponize the Druze identity to its own advantage, painting itself as a protector of minorities against the barbaric Muslim hordes. And so I think that's about it. If you want more information, if you want to understand the Druze faith, history, society, and the politics, then check out the full video, which is in the description below. And lastly, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for getting this far. If you like this work, please consider supporting me, obviously by liking and subscribing. That's the easiest way you can go about that. But also, I do all this work myself. I write these videos, I do the editing, obviously the presenting. And so I would really be grateful for people that can support financially. You can do that in a number of ways. I've got a Ko-fi, which is a tip jar. That's the best way. Or if you're more comfortable, you can give money directly through YouTube, either by becoming a member of my channel or by giving me a super thanks, which is basically like a highlighted message with like 2, 3, 5 euros or something. So, with that said, I'll see you all in the next one.